and to the government. Thank you.
Speaker.
I call Ron Mark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I rise on behalf of New Zealand First to say that New Zealand First has major issues with Mr Upton's being appointed as the next Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment. And we actually, at that time, we made our views well known early on in the piece. I think from our perspective, he fails at the first test, and that is that the appointee should be politically neutral. And we do not share the confidence of other parties in the House that he is so. From our part, we see Mr Upton as being a retread, National Party Member of Parliament for 19 years, a Cabinet Minister who in the pantheon of Cabinet Ministers is right up there with the Dr Nick Smith. We see actually as a bit of a victory for Dr Nick Smith in what will be the final conversion of the blue-greens into the green-blues, as the Greenies within the National Party cement their hold on rural policy and rural environmental laws that are slowly being rolled out upon them through such things as the RMA. What we believe we need in this Parliament is a Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment. Or what we don't believe we need is a Parliamentary Commissioner for the Environment who is a previous Young National Party chairman. We fail to see why Mr Upton, a Rhodes Scholar with degrees in English, literature, music, law and a Masters in political philosophy, is suddenly qualified for this important role. 3 previous commissioners have all been highly qualified scientists, devoid of any political entanglements, unlike Mr Upton, who is donkey deep inside of the National Party's Old Boys Beltway network. We look at past commissioners, Dr Helen Dews, a Fulbright scholar and expert in botany, Dr Morgan Williams, a hugely respected ecologist with a Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries background, and then there is Dr Jan Wright, a physicist with a doctorate from the John F. Kennedy School of Government. To be fair, we've not always agreed with the Commissioner, but these were all experts with no agenda. They shared 2 things, legitimacy and integrity. Then you come to Mr Upton, who is regarded as the Dr Nick Smith of this day, an ideologue with little political nous, who is never so accident-prone in whatever portfolio he touched. Mr Upton entered Parliament in 1981 as the MP for Waikato, aged 23. He left it 19 years later and did what red-blooded Kiwis all do, go to France. The Organisation for the Economic Cooperation and Development, nothing he authored, was very convincing because he swapped one beltway for another cosmopolitan-type beltway. So what is Mr Upton's track record? It is shameful. All other parties rolled over and allowed their tummies to be tickled, and we have the Pepsi-Coke decision, coalition, the Pepsi-Coke coalition between National Labour, and nothing's new here. Mr Upton was responsible for messing up the Resource Management Act in the outset, including the removal of private property rights from the original 1989 Resource Management Bill. The RMA is unloved by many as being a bureaucratic hydra, and Mr Upton was its midwife. Mr Upton, not content with stuffing up our planning system, set the groundwork for the Kyoto Protocol, which sees taxpayers paying close to $250 million to achieve absolutely nothing. He also broke up the legendary DSIR into competing Crown research institutes, and what an absolute disaster that has proven to be. And now we scrap over smaller and smaller pieces of research pie, and with this government actually then handing that funding over to private sector, and we end up with the Myrtle Rust disaster, which is now 1,000 kilometres off our shore, and who knows, it might even be here because we have not put in place any sort of protocols about people moving on and off Rail Island. We forget he was one of the most useless ministers of health, and he showed a cold heart over compensation for bad blood transfusions, and even was the person who introduced cash registers into hospitals. Mr Speaker, New Zealand First has a serious problem with this propensity to employ old boys from the parliamentary beltway back into state appointments with their political backgrounds, and we need a commissioner who we can have confidence in, and we have not got confidence in Mr Upton.
Members, this debate is concluded. The question is that the motion be agreed to.